Hi guys, and welcome to our revision of animal responses to the environment. Exams are close. We need to move on with our revision, so let's go straight into it. We're looking at multiple choice questions, guys, and when we look at multiple choice questions, remember not only the correct answer is important here from what we get from these multiple choice, because there's no guarantee that the same multiple choice question can come in your paper or any time later. The purpose of going through multiple choice question is to practice the art, the technique of answering multiple choice questions. So let's look at these questions which we've adapted from November 2011, and we've also taken from the Exemplar 2011, paper 2. The first one says, question 1 and question 2 are based on the diagram of a reflex arc shown below. First of all, guys, a diagram like this can be used for your revision on the section of reflex arc, reflex action. The minute you look at a diagram like this, put in some labels and some annotations, meaning some small notes that will help you to learn it. Just with this diagram, you can be self-assured that you are ready for the section on reflex action. So use these type of diagrams because they form what we call concept maps later. All right. The first question says, okay, they've given you a diagram with some labels there with letters and so on, and you can see what's happening there. It says part B indicates. Now let's see what part B indicates, guys. There's part B in this area here. This is the line that part B is pointing to here. Now where does this line come from? It's coming at the point from the finger there, and notice that the stimulus in this case is the burning candle there. So that is where the position of this particular neuron is. The question is about neurons. So let's see what the question is asking. Part B indicates the dendrite of a motor neuron, B axon of the motor neuron, C dendrite of the sensory neuron, and D axon of the sensory neuron. Now, guys, the technique in multiple choice questions. Let's go back here. Where is this situated? It is situated in the finger. And the finger is the point where the receptors are found. So obviously, this would be sensory neuron. It cannot be a motor neuron. So let's go back to the multiple choice again. What can we do now? Because we know it's a sensory neuron, we can strike out that one because it has motor neuron, and B is also struck off. Now, what have we done? We have eliminated some of the options, so we are left with 9 out of 10, only 2 to choose from, which is easier than choosing from 4. This is what we call in multiple choice the elimination process. So C says the dendrite of a sensory neuron, and D says the axon of the sensory neuron. Now we need to figure out whether this is a dendrite or an axon. Again, we got to go back to the diagram. What do we know about neurons? Neurons are designed in such a way that impulses come from one way, they go through a cell body, and they go out the other way. The way they come in, that structure is called the dendrite. And where they go out from the away from the cell body is known as the axon. So we've got to look at our diagram again. Here's the line B that they're looking for there. Where's the cell body? There's the cell body there. So this line, obviously if the stimulus is here, the arrow of this impulse will be in that general direction. So this arrow or this line or this structure is going to the cell body. So it is a dendrite and not an axon. So the correct answer then would be C, the dendrite of the sensory neuron. Good. 1.2. The correct sequence in which the impulses move from the receptor to the effector in the reflex arc above is. So first of all, go back again to the diagram. Always refer to the diagram or the source, whatever they're talking about. Where would the receptor be found? The receptor would be found at the point of entry of the stimulus. And that is in this general area here. I'm going to put a dotted line around that so it doesn't confuse you. And the effector would be found where the reaction or the response comes from, and that is here by A. So whatever we do, our answer should be based on ending here by A or starting somewhere here by C. So let's look at the options that they have. The one that says A at the beginning there, there's one that says A at the beginning there. And where's A? A is the effector. You cannot start this thing at the effector. So therefore, process of elimination, we strike out that one without even looking at the others. You don't even look at the other stuff. Because A starts, A is the effector. It's going to bring about a response. It will not initiate this thing. It will bring about a response at the end. So we strike those two out. And notice the other two start with C. I told you C must be our starting point and A must be our ending point. So we go back there and we look at these two here. And the first one, already if I told you C is the starting point and A is the ending point, then obviously C is the more correct answer already. But let's look at B, just for our interest. C starts there. The next one is A. So already that's a problem. You cannot start with C and go next to A and then carry on. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. What actually happens is that the stimulus is picked up by receptors here by C. This stimulus go into B, which is the sensory neuron. From there, it would go and enter the spinal cord from the dorsal horn of the gray matter there, make a synapse with an interneuron, which makes another synapse with a motor neuron, which leaves the spinal cord via the ventral horn, and this will then lead to the effector where the response is brought about and this person's muscles will contract to pull the hand away. So can you see what I meant earlier? At a diagram like this, although this is a multiple choice question, guys, you can learn the whole section on reflex arc just by looking at this diagram and the questions. So let's go back there. And obviously, C, there's C, then B, there's B, then E, there's E, and lastly, A. So this one is correct, and therefore the answer again in this case was C. People, I'm hoping you're with me in terms of the technique, not the answer C, because it may come, the same type of question can come in and they can change the order in which they ask the question. But the technique, what do you eliminate? You eliminate those things that cannot, definitely not be the answer. So you only left with either, sometimes you're lucky, you'll be left with only one. But most times you'll be left with two, and then you got to choose the correct one from two, which is easier than choosing from four. Next question. Which of the following is an exocrine gland? Now here you needed to know your work. What's the opposite of this one? No, can't say opposite, but the other type of gland that we get is known as the endocrine gland. An endocrine gland is a ductless gland. Ductless meaning it does not secrete its secretions into a duct. Whatever, for example, hormones, they are secreted directly into the bloodstream. There's no duct that takes it somewhere. So when we studied the endocrine system, all the glands in the endocrine system are endocrine glands. Obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be falling under the system, endocrine system. So if we really look at it, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And guys, every one of these are part of the endocrine system. Now it gives you a bit of a problem. The thyroid glands, endocrine; pancreas, insulin, glucagon, endocrine; adrenal gland, adrenaline; pituitary gland, growth hormone, FSH, and all the rest of them, they're all endocrine glands. But this guy here, B, the pancreas, works as an endocrine and exocrine gland. It works as an endocrine gland when it secretes the hormones insulin and glucagon directly into the bloodstream. It's endocrine during that time. But at the same time, the pancreas is part of the digestive system. It secretes pancreatic juice, which has essential enzymes for the breakdown of food, and that juice is secreted into the pancreatic duct, and that pancreatic duct will eventually lead to the duodenum, to the small intestine, where the juices are then released into that area. So by that way, it acts as an exocrine. So the pancreas acts as an endocrine and an exocrine gland. When it's doing its job for insulin and glucagon, endo. When it does its job for digestive system and pancreatic juice, exocrine gland. So the correct answer there is B. This one was tricky because you needed to know your work to answer this question, because every one of these fall under that heading. Next question, 1.4. The ability of the lens to change its curvature is known as astigmatism, binocular vision, accommodation, pupillary mechanism. First of all, we're talking of the lens, so we cannot have pupillary mechanism as an answer. So it's wrong. This is talking of the ability of the lens. Astigmatism is a condition that people suffer from in case of the eye, which we will talk about later. And so A can't be right as well. So now you're left with two. One is binocular vision and the other one is accommodation. Binocular vision, meaning we are looking with two eyes. So that one is wrong. So your correct answer here again is C, accommodation. But obviously, guys, if you knew your work, then you didn't even need to do this, because the minute they spoke about the lens and changing its shape, the word accommodation should come to your mind immediately so that you can get that answer as well. 1.5, diabetes is caused by an. First of all, diabetes is associated with the pancreas. So keep that in mind. Over secretion of adrenaline? No. Under secretion of insulin? Maybe. Over secretion of aldosterone? No, that's aldosterone does salt. Adrenaline, emergencies. Insulin, we know, is dealing with sugar and therefore diabetes there. Under secretion of glucagon, could be that one as well. So these are the two that we need to choose from. Now, in a question like this, when they're talking about the under secretion of a hormone, diabetes is caused by this one here, an under secretion of insulin. It's B. Now, remember also there are two types of diabetes. Diabetes insipidus and diabetes mellitus. The one that we learn is diabetes mellitus, where the person cannot reduce his sugar level. He has a high sugar level. And this one is associated with either a deficiency in insulin, under secretion, or the insulin is not working properly. So therefore, in this case, a most correct answer would be B, the under secretion of insulin. I'm hoping we're good with that. Those are the multiple choice questions, guys. We had 5 good multiple choice and we look at them, how we had to answer them, the technique. The whole idea was to get those juices flowing in terms of how to answer those questions. Let's move on to the bigger question now. We're looking at question 2 from the November 2011 paper, question 2.1, and this one deals with the ear. Study the diagram below showing a portion of the human ear and answer the questions that follow. There is a beautiful diagram of the ear there, the portion of the ear, showing most of the structures of the ear. 2.1, provide labels. Normally, and I've been saying this over and over again, the minute you get a diagram, the first part of the question would always be to label the diagram. So guys, you cannot go into the exam, especially in paper 2, without learning the diagrams with their labels. And for that, you don't have to learn a whole page or a textbook. You need to learn the diagram, the whole diagram, take it, put it there, label it. Next to the labels of each part, put the functions next to it. That will make it easy, because you look at one page only or half a page of a diagram and you've got the whole structure and function on a page, instead of going through 15 pages in a book. Structure, the ear is made up of the pinna traps sound waves, etc. You can do it on the diagram. For example, here, if we had to label something here, and let's say we label, this one doesn't have, so it's easier. It's not going to affect the question. So this one here we label as pinna, and we use another color pen to say there, traps sound waves. So that's an annotated diagram now. You're giving a label, and next to it you're giving its function. So all around this diagram you can do that. It makes your life easy. Okay, let's go back to our color and provide labels for A, C, and D respectively. Remember, in your answer book, you're going to write down A, C, and D. Do it that way, one below the other, so that it's easier for the marker. When they're marking, they're just going to mark this way. The minute you start switching from here, then C there, and then D, the marker may miss the C. He may not see the C on the other side. It becomes complicated. This way, this is how the memo is set out, so you do it the same way. We're going to label on the diagram, however. A, the structure here, this one here, that is the tympanic membrane. C, this one here, that is the oval window. And the last one was D. D is this guy here, that is the round window. Good. So you would have written it here. Tympanic membrane. Remember, I'm abbreviating. You cannot do this in exam. And then was the oval window. And then the round window. State one function for parts B and D respectively. B and D. There's B. B, they're referring to 1, 2, and 3 together. This one, that one there, right? And D was the round window. So the function of the ossicles, B being the ossicles. Remember, in a diagram, if they had to ask you to label this thing here, from here to there, B, you would say ossicles. You cannot write down hammer or anvil or stirrup in that, because it's not referring to any one of them. It's referring to them as a group. If the label is on any one of them, then you have to give the specific name of that bone, the hammer, the anvil, or the stirrup. Please understand that when you are answering your questions. If the curly bracket is there over all, ossicles. If each individual bone or one of the individual bones, the label line goes to it, then you have to give the name of that particular bone. Please understand that. So the first one, they want to know the functions of the ossicles, and look at the position of the ossicles. Where's the ossicles? In the middle ear. What's on this side? The tympanic membrane. What's on the other side? The oval window. So what's the job of the ossicles then? It's to take the vibrations from the tympanic membrane to the oval window. So that's our function there. Ossicles transmit sound waves from, must always say from where? From the tympanic membrane to the oval window. And while they're doing that, because of the smaller size as we're going down from the eardrum or the tympanic membrane, the hammer, anvil, stirrup, and oval window, there's a progressive decrease in size. We can also say the other function is to amplify sound. I'm not going to go into too much detail there because we're coming back to that just now. And the other one was D. D was the round window. So D is the round window. Notice you do not have to rewrite round window in your answer. I'm writing it so that we don't have to go up again. A round window absorbs excess vibrations. You see, when the sound waves are traveling through the ear, and if you know your structure of your inner ear, then you'll understand that when this happens, the vibrations go through the perilymph of the vestibular canal and the tympanic canal, and this causes vibrations. The excess vibrations are absorbed by the round window. In that way, we do not have too much of vibrations, and the vibrations do not return back in the opposite direction. Good. Move on. Question 2.3, guys. How are parts A and C together suited for the amplification of sound? We've explained earlier, or rather we mentioned earlier about this amplifying sound. Amplifying sound means to make it louder. If you have a hi-fi at home and you have an amplifier, the purpose of the amplifier is to make the sound louder. Same in your car if you put an amplifier. So that's the purpose here of these things that we spoke about. Now they want to know A and C together. A is the tympanic membrane. C is the oval window. Now how do these things together amplify the sound? Look at the size of A, the tympanic membrane, compared to the size of the oval window. You can see already that the tympanic membrane is larger than the oval window. So we say that the tympanic membrane has a larger surface area than the oval window. Now in this answer, guys, you didn't have to mention tympanic membrane, you didn't even have to mention oval window. You had to just say that A has a larger surface area than C. It would have also been correct. Now how does this help? What we are saying here is that because the tympanic membrane has a larger surface, we're getting all these vibrations coming here to this tympanic membrane, and all these vibrations are transferred from this big surface area to a smaller surface area. So because of that difference in size, we're getting the amplification of sound. What has happened is we've taken a lot of sound from a large surface area and we have transmitted it to a smaller surface area there. Okay? Explain what would happen if part E is blocked with mucus. Again, we always have to go back to the diagram. Part E is the eustachian tube. And what's going to happen if it's blocked with mucus there, especially if you have a cold or a flu, it's blocked. Again, when they ask these type of questions, when they say explain or predict what will happen if something happens to this thing, the first thing you got to ask yourself is, what does this thing do? The eustachian tube is there to balance pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane, from the outside and from the inside. So if it is blocked with mucus, it would not be able to do this. So therefore, it will not be able to equalize or balance the pressure on either side of the tympanic membrane, and this could lead to partial deafness. Why? Because the tympanic membrane could burst. If the pressure on the inside is too high, it will burst outwards. If the pressure on the outside is too high, it could burst inwards. And this would then leave the eardrum or the tympanic membrane with a hole or a perforation, as we would call it. And this would obviously lead to less sound waves being transmitted, and this could lead to partial deafness. Also, because it is found in this area and because there's mucus here, it could also affect the free movement of these three bones, and that too could lead to partial deafness because the intensity of the vibrations would decrease. But always try to answer the question first in terms of the function of that particular part. The purpose is to equalize the pressure on either side. So keep that in mind when you answer a question like this. With that, guys, I think we've done quite a bit in this little session. Let's take a small break. Hi guys, and welcome back. I'm hoping you enjoyed that little break that you had. Let's move on to question 3 from March 2012, paper 2, question 2.1. We're calling it 3.1 because we are moving in a different sequence. Study the diagram below showing a longitudinal section through an eye. Okay, so we have a diagram of an eye, a beautiful diagram of an eye there, and they give you a label, they're giving you some numbers. They say label parts 2, 3, 4, and 5 respectively. Again, remember, you're going to write 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you're going to write your answers there. We're going to do it on the diagram. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Chew, the structure that's coming down there, around that area there, this one here, would be the cornea. 3, that's an easy one, the lens. 4, the structures that hold the lens to this structure here is known as the suspensory ligaments. And 5, the structure here, ciliary muscle and body. So that's our labels done. Very simple, straightforward. You need to know the labels. Remember that. Next one, study the diagram. We carry on with the same thing there. Name and describe the process. Name and describe the process that causes part 1 to dilate. This is part 1, this gap between that structure there and that structure there, this area here. I must tell you, while I'm doing this, of 1 year when we were marking, pupils were asked to draw the front end of the eye. And when they drew this structure here, the guy drew something to this effect. And he did that. And he put that there, and he called this the pupil. He drew a stick diagram of a pupil, and he said that that's the pupil. Let's take that out of there. Now we are talking of that stuff, it's called the pupil, yes? It's definitely called the pupil. Remember, the pupil is not a structure, it's the gap between the iris. And your iris is not in this way, the way we're seeing here. This is a longitudinal section. The actual iris should have been round, like that. If you look into each other's eyes, and I know you like to do that every now and then, you'll find a structure like that. This is the iris here, and the gap, the hole in the middle, is known as the pupil. So understand that properly. So they want to know the process that causes this part here to dilate. A little bit of language lesson. Dilate means to become wider. Not thicker, but wider. Thick and wide are two different things. Please keep that in mind. Do not use the word thick there. So they want to name the process. This is dealing with the pupil, so this will be the pupillary mechanism. And describe the process, cause it to dilate. When does the pupil dilate? The pupil dilates normally during dim conditions, when there's low light intensity. So therefore, we must explain that or describe that process. So during dim conditions, first of all, we're telling them, because they're going to give you a mark because they didn't tell you here it's dim. They told you it dilates. So you're telling them this will dilate during dim conditions. And I told you this before when we did the section, always use this little mnemonic, debit, credit. In dim conditions, the radial muscles contract. And C squared, I always say, C, the circular muscles relax. And if that happens, the pupil dilates. Why does it dilate? To allow more light to enter. These two are generally in dim conditions, they are obvious and they are common sense. If there's low light, the pupil must become dilated so you can allow more light to pass through. In any question, whenever they ask you this question here, if they ask you in dim condition, remember that the pupil must dilate to allow more light to pass. So even if you don't remember the circular muscles and the radial muscles, at least write that out, because you'll get 2 marks for saying those things, not in this question, but in another question if they ask you. So please remember that. And remember the mnemonic. And obviously, if we ask in bright condition or we ask you if the pupil must constrict, then it will be the opposite. It will be bright conditions. The radial muscles will relax. The circular muscles will contract. The pupil constricts to allow less light to pass through. It's as simple as that. So please make sure that you learn that and try better. Obviously, you must understand this. You have to understand this. But if you're learning it anyway, learn one of the two. Either dilate the dim conditions or bright. Because what happens in an exam, you're under pressure, the question is asking you for bright, and you start scratching your head and say, ish. Which one do I know now? Is it bright or is it dim? And you start confusing the two. If you know bright and they ask you bright in the exam, you say, yeah, baby, I'm going to answer this here. If they ask you dim, you say, yeah, baby, still, because you're going to say what you know is bright. What is the dumb? The opposite of what you know. So all you got to do is change one word. And which words are they? I'll show you now. For example, if we had to do this one, dumb condition will become bright. Radial muscles contract would become relax. Circular muscles relax will become contract. Look at it, we're only changing one word. Pupil dilate becomes constrict and allows less light to pass through or to enter. It's simple as that. Notice bright, I'm writing it here for you. Bright is in this color. And dim is in that color, the green, or the pink and the green. And there's it on one page. You can do the same in your book when you're studying this. Good, let's move on. State how the following defects can be treated to improve vision. So we're looking at defects and we want to know how we can improve it. Long-sightedness, that means you can see something far away, but you can't read something that's close to you. Okay, so it's also known as distant vision or long-sightedness. So now what will happen is you need to solve the problem. And to solve the problem, you need to make the focal length smaller. The focal length is probably too long, or the eyeball is too short. So what's happening is that the image is falling behind the retina when you're looking at something close to you. And we don't want it behind, we don't want it in front, we want it on top of the retina, on the retina, not on top. On top is just my pun for making you understand. It must be on the retina. Why? Because the rods and cones are on the retina. So for long-sightedness, we must give the person biconvex lenses, either spectacles or contact lenses, or the person can have laser done to alter the shape of the cornea. Astigmatism. What's the problem with astigmatism? At different points the cornea is curved differently. So you're having a problem depending where the image is coming through, you're going to have a problem that way. Here it's curved for long, here it's curved for short, and so on. So it's an unequal curvature of the cornea. So how do we fix that up there? We must provide lenses with uneven curvature. The lens must be unevenly curved according to your eye requirements. Cataract, that one is easy. We surgically remove the cataract and replace the lens. Short-sightedness, that means you can see things that are below 6 meters, but you can't see anything 6 meters and beyond. So in that case there, that means either the focal length is too short or the eyeball is too long, so the image is falling before the retina. It's not falling on the retina when you're looking at things that are far away. Not far away in a very distant, remember 6 meters and above, that is distant vision. So that's the problem there. So to correct that, we need to correct the focal length. And how do we do that? By changing the curve of the lens. And how do we do that? We would give the person concave lenses, either contact lenses or even spectacles, but the lens itself that we're using must be concave. Or again, laser to alter shape of cornea. So one of the two there we could give the person. Good. Let's move on. Still on the eye. A little bit of reading here. Jabu took part in an experiment on the eye's response to light. A lamp was placed at seven positions from Jabu's face. The diameter of Jabu's pupil was measured at each position. Here's the table here. Position 1, 1.2, and going right through to 4.8 millimeters of the pupil dilation. What happens now? At which position was the lamp furthest from the eye? This question was fairly easy. It would obviously be 7. And I'm not going to go into the other story there because they're going to ask you to explain your answer in question 3.2.1. And the answer is the pupil diameter is the greatest at position 7. Simple, straightforward, guys. Obviously, the further away the lamp is going to be, the less light there's going to be, and therefore the wider or the more dilated the pupil needs to be. The closer the lamp is, the more there's light available, the pupil must be constricted to the smallest possible constriction it can be. Carrying on with that, when the lamp was moved from position 1 to position 2, describe the mechanism that caused the change in the diameter of the pupil from here to there. The lamp was there, we moved it away. What do you notice? What has happened? 1.2 to 1.8. So in other words, the pupil has dilated. And we do not have to discuss this answer here because we have just done that here. In other words, these are the conditions. It was dimmer. So therefore, the radial muscles contract, the circular muscles relax, pupil dilates to allow more light to pass through. Same question. This was in 2012. This was in 2011. Can you see that they're testing the same thing there? So we do not have to redo that answer, and we don't have to discuss it because you just need to know that. All you need to know that from that position to that position, it dilated. If the table was reversed, and let's say we had position 1, 4,8, and the next one was 4,2, and so on and so on, then we would be talking about constricting, and that's a different story. The opposite, the pink that we spoke about earlier. So we're not discussing that answer there. We've already done that earlier. Next question says, study the diagram below showing a reflex arc. Again, we're seeing a reflex arc. Identify the neuron labeled A. Now, this is a longer question. They just want to know the label, and we label it here. And look where it is found. It's found in the gray matter of the spinal cord, in between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron, and therefore that would be a connector or inter or relay neuron. Different textbooks would use different words for that, but any one of these are correct: connector, inter, or relay neuron. Name the type of neuron that is connected to structure B. So we go to structure B. There's structure B. This is a muscle, as you can see clearly. So it is an effector. And what is this neuron here coming out of the spinal cord and going there, this area here? Look at the direction of impulse also. And the one that brings impulses to the effector is known as a motor neuron. Just a quick note here. A sensory neuron transmits impulses from I'll just write that there. Impulses from receptor to CNS. Motor neuron impulses from CNS to effector. That's how we know which one is where there. And we can add, let's see if I got space above that. Yeah, connector. Impulses again, same thing, impulses from sensory to motor. And the word connector tells you, or relay, inter, between two of the neurons. Good. Let's move on. Explain the effect on the body if the neuron mentioned in question 4.1.2 is damaged. This one here. If it's damaged, what's going to be the situation there? The person would not be able to respond to the stimulus even though he is aware of the stimulus. Imagine that. You're aware that you're getting burnt, but you cannot move your hand away. That's dangerous, obviously, because you're going to burn your whole skin. Normally, when we get burnt, the minute you touch something hot, you pull your hand away. That's what the reflex action is about. It is there to protect the body. So now you can feel it, but you can't move it away. That's absolutely dangerous, right? Okay, so that's the story there. Explain the reflex actions in humans. Obviously, they protect the body from further damage. Obviously, you're going to get burnt. All right, if you put your hand in a fire, you're going to get burnt. But if you leave it there and the reflex action did not kick in, then your hand will get burnt more and your whole body will burn. So this way, the reflex action takes it away. You had a little burning, but you have prevented further damage. The same thing if you tramp on a thorn. The same thing happens. You jump away. If you left it, the thorn would go deeper and maybe cause further bleeding, etc. So that is the significance there. Let's move on, and now we're looking at the brain. Notice we've looked at the ear, we've looked at the eye, we looked at the reflex action, and now we're looking at the brain. Study the diagram below and answer the questions that follow. Write down only the letter. This is a good instruction question now. They're asking you for the letter. Note in this question, if you give the name, bong, you're out. You don't get a mark for it. You have to provide the letter, not the name. So the first one says controls heartbeat. And that would be structure C, the medulla oblongata. B, and actually this question should be controls the rate of the heartbeat, because the medulla oblongata does not control the heartbeat itself, but it controls the rate of the heartbeat. The heart can beat on its own. It does not need nerve intervention. The medulla oblongata controls whether it beats faster or slower. Contains the centers that control balance, muscle tone, and equilibrium, and that would be the cerebellum. Obviously, guys, you needed to know the section to answer this question. See, already I'm getting 0. Why? Because I am writing the name. No. That's not what you're supposed to do. You must give the letter, and the letter is B in that case. Has centers that interpret what you see, and that would be obviously A, the cerebrum. Coordinates voluntary muscle movements. That would also be B, the cerebellum. This one here. In this particular diagram, guys, you need to know the label of the cerebrum, cerebellum, medulla oblongata, and the hypothalamus. Those are the 4 that you need to know. You need to know the labels, and you need to know the functions of those 4 parts. Very important. Okay? Has a part that has gray matter on the inside and white matter on the outside. That is the spinal cord, and in this diagram the spinal cord would be that part there, D, because that's the pons varoli. If you look at the diagram, that's the pons. This would be the medulla, and therefore anything below the medulla then would be the spinal cord. And it's only in the spinal cord where the white matter is on the outside and the gray matter is on the inside, and that would be part D. Right, guys, we have now covered all of the areas that you need to know in the central nervous system and the sense organs. Remember, over and above what we have discussed in this particular question, you also need to know the difference between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, only in terms of their function. When the one obviously causes the pupil to dilate, the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, for example, causes the pupil of the eye to constrict, and the heartbeat and blood pressure, etc., etc. You need to know that as well. Guys, with that, I think you need a small break again. Hi guys, and welcome back. I'm hoping you are ready for action. Let's move on. Question 4.3. Now we're moving to the endocrine system. It's also animal responses. Study the diagram below and answer the questions that follow. Straightforward there. They're giving you a diagram. They're saying label parts 1 and 4. Notice it says 1 and 4. Be careful with the story there, 1 and 4 and 1 to 4. In this one, only 1. That is the pituitary gland or the hypophysis. And 4, adrenal gland. Write down the number, only the number of the gland that produces the hormone glucagon. That is number 3, the pancreas. Produce a hormone that controls the growth of long bones. That would be number 1, the pituitary gland. produce an iodine-containing hormone. That would be the thyroid gland, and that is number 2. Produces a hormone that is involved in the reabsorption of salts by the kidney. That would be adrenal gland, and that is number 4 in our diagram. You need to know your work, you need to know the glands, you need to know the hormones they secrete, and you need to know the function of those hormones in this section. You also need to know negative feedback. Let's move on. State 2 similarities between hormones and nerves with regards their functions. Okay, first of all, both hormones and nerves, they react or respond rather to stimulus. Both of them respond to a stimulus. Some stimulus takes place and they respond to that. And 2, they are both protect the body. Remember, protect the body. They ask for functional similarities. And the last question there, one functional difference between hormones and motor neurons. Okay, a hormone has a larger area of action, whereas a hormone, or rather a motor nerve, has a specific area of action. For example, you take your growth hormone. It is secreted and it has, the whole body is affected by the growth hormone. Whereas a motor neuron, it's causing a muscle, particular muscle to contract or relax. Guys, we move on to question 4.5 now, and we're choosing this one here because it's an essay question. The question says, describe how the principle of negative feedback operates in controlling the glucose concentration of the blood in a normal, healthy person. That means he doesn't have diabetes or whatever. Also describe the causes, symptoms, and management of the disease diabetes mellitus, which results from an inability of the body to normalize the glucose concentration of the blood. Now, first thing I always tell you when you're doing the essay, look for the verbs. And the first verb is described. And you see that there's something written after that. What's all that? The principle of negative feedback operates in controlling glucose concentration. All right? The next verb. Also describe. What? What we do after that? What's after that? The causes, the symptoms, and management of the disease diabetes mellitus, which results from whatever. The words after that don't matter in terms of your instruction. You need to read the whole thing, obviously, but in terms of your instruction, what you have to do two things. You have to describe how the negative feedback mechanism operates, 1. 2, you have to describe the causes, 2.1 you can call it, 2.2 the symptoms, and the management of the disease diabetes mellitus. So notice that you have to structure your essay in such a way that you'd follow the sequence that is coming on this page. The way the question is answered, answer it in that sequence. And for your reference today, what we've done is we've put the memo here to show you how the essay is marked. Let's look at that memo. So first of all, we start by saying, notice you don't have to write this heading. You know, sometimes we are afraid to show people things because you put this, you're going to write memorandum first. This memorandum is not necessary. That's just for us. Okay? So let's take that out. So here we're saying when abnormal levels of glucose are detected by the pancreas, the islets of Langerhans secretes hormones into the bloodstream. So that is what we are saying there in general. So your first introduction, you're saying that. Now, how does this negative feedback work? So first you talk about when it rises. When the blood sugar level rises, insulin is secreted to decrease the blood sugar level back to normal. Insulin secretion is then inhibited. Or you could say insulin is secreted to convert glucose. This is what glucose? The excess glucose into glycogen and fat in the liver. This is where it works. Notice that the insulin is secreted by the pancreas, but it works in the liver. So you could add that on. Remember, we could add that there. Now what happens when it falls? Then glucagon, the next hormone, is secreted to increase the blood sugar level back to normal. How? By converting glycogen. Remember, here we made it into glycogen. Now we're storing it in that form. Glycogen to glucose. So can you see what has happened? We have a stimulus. The stimulus is, in the first case, the stimulus was the level of glucose rises. What was the response? It dropped. Can you see that? That's the negative feedback mechanism. This is what a negative feedback mechanism. The response is one, and the stimulus is in one direction, and the response is in the opposite direction. Why? To bring about harmony, to bring about homeostasis, a balance. It must always be the normal level. Your answer must always come back to the normal level of glucose. Now, the next part, the causes of diabetes mellitus. First of all, inadequate secretion or non-secretion of insulin, or production of defective insulin. These are all causes. Body cells resistant to the action of insulin. So that's another problem. Or the inability of cells to use glucose efficiently. That means you have glucose, you're not using it properly, therefore there's too much of glucose. So notice there's any two given there. The main marks were given for the negative feedback mechanism. 10 marks. Then we spoke about the symptoms. These are all the symptoms. We find glucose in the urine, frequent urination, extreme thirst all the time, fatigue, lethargy, faintness, you're feeling very tired too often, nausea, vomiting, weight loss, blurred vision, non-healing of wounds. All of these could be symptoms of sugar diabetes. And there they gave you any three of those. And lastly, the management of diabetes mellitus. First of all, exercise, because you have extra glucose. If you exercise, you're going to burn up that glucose. Secondly, eating diet suitable for diabetic person. And today, guys, there are so many things available on the market, even sweets, even ice cream without sugar. So there's no excuse for a person that has diabetes and is not following the normal diet. Diet and exercise are crucial for the management of diabetes mellitus. You've got to exercise regularly to burn the sugar, and you've got to eat properly so you're not building up unnecessary sugar in your body. Using prescribed medication, drugs for the management of diabetes mellitus. You get insulin injections or glucophage and other tablets that bring the glucose level down. Guys, notice how the essay is set out in the memo. You are allowed to write in this fashion. You don't have to put the bullets, but you can write one idea on a line and take it to the next. And notice that each sentence here stands on its own. You must be able to, when I read your answer, the sentence must stand on its own. You can't just put insulin in one line and it means nothing to me. It must be within a sentence. The sense of the answer is important. It must make sense. And when you put it together, you follow a logical sequence. And the sequence is easier because you saw what I've done there. It said describe this, then it said describe this, this and this. So you follow that sequence. Do not write unnecessary facts. And you would then get your 3 marks for synthesis if your answer was answered all the parts of the question and there was no irrelevant information. You would get 3. If your answer was correct and you left out some facts and you had irrelevant information, you would probably get 2. And if you were too many gaps, that means you wrote, you gave one symptom here and you gave 2 points on negative feedback, then you'll get 1. And if your answer was not done, or your answer was completely irrelevant, then you would get 0. That's how the 3 marks of synthesis are given. Notice, nowhere in this answer we wrote here anywhere a heading synthesis and we wrote something there. The synthesis is what the marker gives you based on the quality of your essay. In life science, we have a mini essay. It's not like other subjects where you have to go into elaborate stuff. We are interested in the facts. The marks are given for the facts. The 3 marks, 17 are given for facts. The other 3 marks are given for synthesis, and that's how you answer a question like this. Guys, make sure that take all possibilities of essays and try and work it out in this way if it has been asked to you. Look at all the past papers, look at every essay and see how you would have answered it now that you know how to answer an essay. With that, guys, I think that's a lot of work for you. Take care, be good, and go out and knock the paper.